So what I'm going to talk about tonight is a bit about citizen science and the North East Cetacean Project. We'll concentrate mainly on bottlenose dolphin, a species that until maybe 12 years ago was just a bit of a curiosity in northeast England, and it's now anything but. So we'll start with, that's me in winter plumage. And winter plumage is generally held from late July through to mid-May in the North Sea off Northumberland. I'm at my happiest when I'm on boats. I spend a lot of time on small boats off the Northumberland coast, and you'll see photographs of a few of them. I've recently started lecturing on cruise ships. Oh, that's an experience. That's a very, very different thing to anything I've done before. Spending my days standing on the observation deck of a cruise ship and then giving talks, trying to explain to people why it's okay to use the word seagull, for example. And it is. I'll die on that hill quite happily. If you want to call things seagulls, you can. Anybody that tells you there's no such thing as a seagull, there is. And if you want to catch me at the end, I'll explain exactly why there are seagulls. The North East Cetacean Project started late 2009, and we started specifically to study one species of dolphin, and that's white-beaked dolphin. I'm going to say it's scarce. We don't actually know how scarce it is. It's assessed by something called SCANS, which is Small Cetacean Abundance in the North Sea. And that's done roughly every 10 years or so. And the 4 scan surveys so far, incredibly, the last 3 have shown the white-beaked dolphin population doubling every time they do a survey. Now, I don't think they're increasing exponentially in the North Sea. The only thing you can assume is that however they were analysing the data before wasn't exactly the same as how they're analysing it now. But in the northeast, it's a scarce animal. It spends most of its time well away from shore. And we set the project up to start studying these. And we were looking specifically for where we find them in the winter. So far, after 13, 14 years of the project, we know how many there are, because I've just finished producing a white-beaked dolphin photo ID catalogue that has 194 different animals in it. We know where their feeding aggregations are, we know where they have their calves, we know where their nursery areas are, and the one question we've not answered is where do they spend the winter? The one thing that the project was set up to discover. We've learned so much more in the meantime, but we still don't know where they are in the winter. I think they're probably just too far from shore for any of our boatmen to want to go out there. So what are cetaceans? Cetaceans are whales, dolphins, porpoises. There are there or thereabouts 90 different species in the world. It's very fluid. Species have been split, species have been lumped. Incredibly, there are 2 species of beaked whale where we don't know what they look like. They've only been found as well-decomposed carcasses on a shoreline. And beaked whales are identified by their dentition, their jaw structure, the tooth structure. And these 2 animals have a jaw structure and tooth structure that's unlike anything that's ever been recorded alive at sea. So we actually have species that we know exist, but we don't know what they look like. And these are not obscure things like different flowers, tiny invertebrates. These are megafauna. These are things that are bigger than us. And they're still so little known. How do we know where they are? There are lots of different ways of knowing where they are. So we can look at historic sightings and strandings records. And I know from all the research I've done in the last 14 or 15 years, historic records tend to be very, very patchy. Prior to 2000, the cetacean records for northeast England are very, very erratic. And we don't know for definite what was there at that time. We can carry out dedicated surveys from ferries and small boats. It's a good way of getting data. You can analyse it for your effort, so you can get good estimates of population size. The big problem is the cost of boat time. And that's one of the reasons why some of the citizen science things we do work so well, because we negate all of that cost. We avoid it and still generate lots and lots of data. We get sightings from boat operators and the public. So all of the boat operators in sea houses, they must be almost fed up of bottlenose dolphin by now. There are bottlenose dolphin sightings so frequently between sea houses and the Farne Islands. Charter boats are giving us their data, the general public, and that's actually where most of our project now focuses, is data that people gather when they just happen to be out at the coast, and they let us know what they've seen, and we're now putting together patterns for all of our regularly occurring species. You can do acoustic monitoring. I know Newcastle University have a network of hydrophones off the southeast Northumberland coast. Natural England have a network of hydrophones. I say network, I think it's about 6 or 7 hydrophones off the Northumberland coast. And they're trying to monitor where bottlenose dolphins are. You can use tagging. There are ethical questions about tagging. Most cetacean tagging involves shooting a small dart with a satellite tracker in it. And within about a week, that will fall out. The animal's skin will reject it. You go and recover it, download the data. One of the few examples of tagging that was much longer term was back on white-beaked dolphins in Iceland. And they caught 2 white-beaked dolphins, punched a hole through the dorsal fin, and shackle-bolted transmitters to them. And they knew that they would rot and fall off within about a year. And they got very nearly a year's worth of data from both. They discovered they move around a lot. We already knew that. And they discovered that they eat things like cod and whiting and lobster, so they feed at the seabed. But we already knew that from the analysis of stomach contents of animals that had washed up dead. And I have a friend who was in that particular research group. And it took them 140 hours to catch a dolphin. They had a net at the side of their boat, and as soon as the dolphins were bow riding, they flipped the net up and caught one. And then they lifted it out of the sea, and somebody hadn't taken into account just how much a dolphin weighs when it's in the air rather than the water. And they almost capsized the boat and had to cut the net and let the dolphin go. And then it was 140 hours before another one came near their boat, unsurprisingly. These are very intelligent animals. So, we have discussed the idea of tagging, but it's ethically so questionable that it's somewhere that I personally wouldn't want to go with our research. So we've done a lot on small boats off the Northumberland coast. So the 2 boats here, the boat on the left is the Sarah JFK. It's a 44-foot converted lifeboat that was an angling charter out of North Shields until 2014. The boat on the top right is the JFK2, which is a purpose-built catamaran, and that's the replacement for the Sarah JFK. One of those boats is much more stable than the other. One of those boats has led to an awful lot of my surveyors being ill. The other one hasn't. For a few years, the North East Cetacean Project was basically me sitting on small boats, watching volunteers wishing that they hadn't volunteered. And down at the bottom, we have, this was the first ever, remember I have to point using the cursor. This was the first ever survey day for the North East Cetacean Project. That was the start of December 2009. Typical Northumberland day, beautiful blue sea, blue sky, lovely fluffy white clouds, and half an hour later, we sailed into this. And that started the beginning of winter 2009-2010. I don't know if many of you can remember what that winter was like. It was particularly unpleasant. That was the winter where we had snow lying on the ground all the way to the Northumberland coast for an entire month. It was not a pleasant winter. Boats didn't go out. Fishing boats didn't go out. We had funding from Natural England, I think, to do 10 surveys that winter. We did 6. We could only find 6 days during the winter where the weather was okay to take the boat out. We've also done quite a lot of survey work with the Northumberland Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority on their old patrol boat, the St Oswald, and the new one, the St Aidan. A bit like the Sarah JFK and the JFK2, one of those boats is much more stable and pleasant to be on than the other. I quite enjoyed working on the St Oswald, but it rolled about quite a lot. And there we are on those boats. We're just doing some data recording at the top right. My least favourite task within our project is data recording. If you're ever on a boat with me and you're looking for cetaceans, make sure you see them first. Because whoever sees something first, they stay looking at it. And whoever doesn't see it first has to do all of the recording. It's not a competition, but... And then down at the bottom, I actually know the date of this survey at the bottom. That's the 25th of February, 2019. And the reason I know the date of that survey is I'd had surgery at the start of January that year, and I was very ill. And that was the first day I went back out on the boat. And we found 50 bottlenose dolphins just off Dunstanburgh Castle. Up to that point, we weren't entirely certain where they were in the winter. And we found them about 3 miles offshore. So through the summer, they're very close in. There's lots of food for them in estuaries, river mouths. Winter, they just move a little bit further out. That rainbow that you can see down at the bottom there, that's a rainbow in the blow of a dolphin that's at the side of the ship. That was my first survey. I was actually in a position where I wasn't sure I was ever going to be going out to sea again. And we had that happen. I am a catalogue of disasters most of the time. I'd normally be moving around a lot more than this, but 2 weeks ago I joined the gym. Last week I went to the gym. This week, carrying a calf injury. You know what they say about the road to hell being paved with good intentions? I thought joining the gym was a great idea, and yet, here I am, limping. So the distribution of bottlenose dolphin in the world, it's extraordinary. Other than the coldest of seas, bottlenose dolphin are found absolutely everywhere. But they're not exactly the same animal everywhere that you find them. If you go to Florida, for example, a big bottlenose dolphin will be about 7 feet in length. If you go to the northeast coast of Scotland, or as you're about to find out, anywhere from the northeast coast of Scotland down to the River Humber, big bottlenose dolphin is about 14 feet in length and weighs about a ton. So whenever you see stories about lone bottlenose dolphins taking up residence in harbours and people going and swimming with them, just think about this if you consider doing that. It's a 14-foot long, 1-ton apex predator. And if it doesn't like you being in the water with it, you've got a huge problem. And one is the fact that it's 14 foot long and weighs a ton. And the other one is it can swim a lot faster than you are. One of the very famous lone dolphins in Ireland had hundreds of people get in the water with it. And a few years ago, one lady got in the water and the dolphin attacked her, completely unexpectedly. And by the time she was dragged out of the water, she's had several broken ribs and a kidney injury. It just went for her for some reason. I wouldn't get in the water with a bottlenose dolphin. So the first Northeast England record of bottlenose dolphin was, I'm going to say, as recently as 1966. And I'm saying as recently as because that was the year I was born, and it makes me feel a lot younger to say as recently as. But all the way up to 2000, there were only 21 records of bottlenose dolphin for Northeast England. But I said before, pre-2000, it's very patchy. We're not entirely certain just how much was being recorded, how much recording effort there was. So things may have been occurring much more frequently than any of the recorded data shows. Then there was Freddie the dolphin in Amble in the late 80s through to 1992. Some of you may gone up and seen Freddie. There was a very unfortunate incident that ended up in a court case. Male dolphins have, and I'll put this as gently as I can, they have a very tactile penis. I have a friend who got in the harbour amble, and Freddie grabbed her and dragged her around the harbour. And it's thought that that was what he also did to the unfortunate gentleman who finished up in court, accused of molesting the dolphin. Remember, 14 foot long, 1 ton apex predator, and a little human ended up in court, accused of molesting him. And then several cetacean experts came forward and said, no, that's just the way dolphins behave. This chap absolutely did nothing wrong. And then if we go forward a little bit more, from 2002 to 2009, there were 133 sightings of bottlenose dolphin in North East England. It was our second most frequently recorded cetacean during that period. The most frequently recorded was harbour porpoise. Bottlenose dolphin has now far exceeded harbour porpoise records in recent years. And there may be some good reasons for that, which I will come on to. But still, even though it was our second most frequently recorded cetacean, a lot of those 133 records were one animal. And it was one animal that lived for 18 months around the Farne Islands and sea houses. And then it came down to the Coquet, the Blythe, the Wansbeck, the Tyne, the Weir. That one animal generated an awful lot of data on its own. So at that point, we would have still thought bottlenose was an unusual thing to see. And then the 21st of October 2012, the day my nephew was christened, this is burned into my memory, because I was in a church in Leeds when I got a phone call from one of the Sea Houses boatmen to say, I've just had 150 dolphins go past the harbour mouth. Then I got a call from another boatman to say, I've just had 150 dolphins. And then I got a call from friends all the way down the Northumberland coast as far as Newbigin saying, guess what? And I'm like, 150 dolphins? And they said, well, how do you know? And I'm like, well, they were actually tracked all the way from Goswick near Holy Island, down past sea houses, all the way to Newbigin, and then they just vanished. And then we had small groups around that winter. I've seen some really interesting video of a little group of dolphins in Bamborough that winter surfing alongside humans on surfboards. So just coming in on the surf towards the shore next to people. And that really marked a big change in the status of bottlenose dolphin in North East England. We started to see little groups regularly, and we started to see them throughout the year, which is something that hadn't happened prior to that. We actually ended up extending our study area, so it now goes all the way from the border right down to Withensea and Spurn Point in East Yorkshire. It's another bad flashback, along with physics lectures here, is that most of my childhood holidays were spent in Withensea. I'm from East Yorkshire originally, although I've spent 30 years up here, so the people in the village where I live almost accept me as a neighbour now. But eventually, maybe another 20 years, I'll be fine. So we've started plotting all of the data from the Scottish border down to the Humber. We've got no real evidence yet that any of the East Coast population of bottlenose dolphins goes south of the Humber. Although a few months ago there were bottlenose dolphins off the coast of Norfolk, and some of them had very distinctive dorsal fins. And I'll talk a bit more about how we identify individual dolphins. But the interesting thing is, not one of those dolphins is in the Aberdeen University catalogue of bottlenose dolphins in eastern Scotland. But there are photographs of those dolphins in the Moray Firth. So wherever they came from, they went into the Moray Firth, then they went all the way to Norfolk. And dolphins do the oddest things, and we don't necessarily know why they're doing them. So our huge data set, and this is a combination of sort of casual, incidental data from people just looking at things at the shore, and some targeted effort-related survey work we've done, shows that between 1991 and 2002, the most frequently reported cetacean is bottlenose dolphin. It's up round about, I think, 1,450 sightings there. And that's not including 2023. One of the reasons I've stopped this at 2022 is because at this time last year we analysed all of our data from the early 90s through to 2022. And we're just in the middle of analysing everything right up to the end of 2023 currently. So you see, what did I say, there's 90-ish species of cetacean in the world. Northumberland has had 20 different species occur. The most recent was November 2020, when an offshore survey vessel found 2 blue whales 18 miles east of Cresswell. And they wrote a research paper saying, this is a new record within the accepted distribution of blue whale. I'm not quite sure that's the right wording, because blue whale had never occurred in the North Sea ever. So it can't have been part of its accepted distribution. But it was certainly a record outside of where we would expect to find them. And blue whale became the 20th cetacean species to be identified in northeast England. But other than bottlenose dolphin, harbour porpoise, white-beaked dolphin and minke whale, you're unlikely to see anything. The others are all very rare. I think killer whale is probably the only other species that's reached 30 records ever. And beyond that, Risso's dolphins, a handful of records. Humpback whale, we've had, I think, 18 records in the last 18 years. Humpback whale is probably the next one that's going to break through and start to be seen regularly. But you can see there, bottlenose dolphin far exceeds everything else. And it's not just because they're easily visible, they're very demonstrative, they spend a lot of time breaching, they're big, they spend most of their life very, very close to shore, so you don't need to be out on boats to find bottlenose dolphin. You could go to the end of Tynemouth Pier, if the Port of Tyne ever reopened the pier. I was trying to do kittiwake surveys in Tynemouth 2 years ago, and I was surveying from the pier, and it was just a lottery as to whether the pier would be open when I got there. And it's really upsetting lots of my volunteers that they can't get out on the pier at the moment. So they're having to slum it on places like Rocky Island at Seaton Sluice. Right? It's a hardship, isn't it? I have the world's tiniest violin for some of my volunteers because they live in wonderful places. One of the humpback whale records was one of our volunteers who lived at Howick. And during lockdown, she was taking her daily permitted exercise, walked out into a garden with a dog, and looked out to see where there was a humpback whale blowing just offshore from her house. I live in an old pit village just north of Bedlington. I could just about see the sea from my house, or I could if they knocked down the church that's over the road from us and I was in my attic. One really interesting thing we found, the big change in the average group size of bottlenose dolphin. So there was a huge spike in bottlenose dolphins in 2014 or 2013. That followed the big movement the previous autumn. We suddenly had large groups of bottlenose dolphin roaming round the Northumberland coast, something we'd never seen previously. And then it suddenly dropped off again. And then it's mainly levelled out at just under 10 animals on average per group. And we think what probably happened, that big movement, there was still a lot of animals spending all of their time together following that big movement. And then they've gradually worked out where the good feeding areas are off the Northumberland coast. And they've now sort of settled into a routine. And we're seeing similar sized groups doing very similar things all of the time. That's possibly my favourite bottlenose dolphin photograph. That group were in King Edward's Bay in Tynemouth, and we were out on a boat, we were out on the JFK2, and what you can't tell from that is the swell is at about 2.5 metres, and we just hid in King Edward's Bay because it was so rough, and we were suddenly surrounded by dolphins. We have photographs of dolphins on the echo sounder chasing fish. They were under the boat. I think they spent 7 hours in one place that day, and they were catching big salmon constantly for 7 hours. One of the things that may well have driven that distribution change, back in 2012, when the bottlenose suddenly started coming down here, I spoke to colleagues in eastern Scotland who said, our salmon run has failed. We've got no salmon up here anymore. And East Coast bottlenose dolphins, their main prey items are salmonids. They eat salmon, they eat sea trout. Occasionally, if you've got a glut of sand eel or sprat, you'll see them surfacing with mouthfuls of tiny fish. But that's not really what they like to do. They like to find big, very energy-dense prey items. Last year, we actually watched one with a turbot, of all things. Bottlenose dolphin don't feed near the seabed. And this thing had gone down, came up with a turbot, and in front of our boat, it was tossing it in the air like a frisbee. They're extraordinary animals. We've seen them throwing jellyfish in the air, turbot, other different types of fish. And then the really big change, and one of my graphs later on will show where the really big change came, happened just before 2020, so sort of 2018 onwards. And all of the data in these charts came from the North East Cetacean Project Facebook group. We have 12,500 members, lots of whom are retired or semi-retired, or somehow are able to work being on the coast in really, really good watch points into their working day. I'm not quite sure how they all do that, but it's generating huge amounts of data. So if you look back to 2020, this is obviously early 2020 and lockdown, and we have a daily sightings thread on the Facebook group. We realised quickly that the amount of data that's generated was completely overwhelming our ability to study it. So we set up a daily sightings post. So every morning, first thing on the North East Cetacean Project Facebook group, there's the daily sightings thread that has a summary of the previous day, and then anybody who sees anything that day just puts it as a comment on that thread. So we've very neatly packaged the data for each day. We actually closed the sightings thread down during lockdown. We didn't want to be seen to be encouraging people to go to the coast. So we were left with reports from a very small handful of our observers that live right on the coast. But as soon as we got to June and everybody was free to move around again, there you go. June 2020, every single day that month had a bottlenose dolphin sighting. July, every single day that month had a bottlenose dolphin sighting. You get to November, December, and we were back into partial lockdown. And again, people just weren't going out and observing. Beginning of 2021, people were still staying at home. And then look what happens as soon as people are released again. We've got May, just short of a bottlenose dolphin every single day. June, July, August, sightings every single day of the month somewhere in northeast England. But then you get to 2022, and all of a sudden we've got May, June, July, August, September, October. Bottlenose dolphin sightings every single day of every month for 6 months. It's an animal that I said before it was just a curiosity for a long time. And all of a sudden, they're somewhere on the northeast coast pretty much permanently. And we have colleagues in Scotland who don't like us referring to them as leaving Scotland. I have one colleague who I'm not going to name who still refers to them as a Scottish bottlenose dolphin population that occasionally heads into northeast England. So occasionally is a good solid 6 months of the year. And again, in 2023, very similar. So May, June, July, August, September. But if you look, so many of these months have a sightings rate above 80%. So 8 out of every 10 days, except for December 2023, 8 out of every 10 days through the entire year, there were bottlenose dolphin sightings in northeast England. They're here. We're just analysing some photo identification data at the moment to try and work out exactly which animals are here, and do we now have a population of bottlenose dolphins that is permanently south of the Scottish border, which is, for reasons I'll explain shortly, it could cause all sorts of issues. And then if we look at which season are you more likely to see them? So this is 2002 to 2022, and there have been 150-ish sightings in the spring, just over 400 in the summer. Winter, still 50 sightings during that period of time. But that is now changing. Like I said, I've not got the 2023 data in these charts, but 2023, the winter suddenly threw up something very unexpected. So that's Northumberland's pattern. That's County Durham's pattern, which is very similar, although very, very few in the winter. And Yorkshire is completely different. Spring, summer, autumn, not fantastic. Winter, again, not great. There's definitely a lot more in the spring. A bigger percentage of Yorkshire sightings are in the spring than in the other two counties. So we're lucky in our project. We have a data analyst who has an MSc in marine biology from Bangor University. I was very privileged a couple of years ago to co-supervise her dissertation. I was contacted by Peter Evans at Bangor University and asked if I would like to co-supervise one of his students, which is, as a medicinal chemist, I was terrified at the idea of supervising a marine biology master's student who knows far more than I do and is much, much better at data analysis than I am. So we got to plot all of the data and break it down into the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s. And you can see how they're moving south, but filling in all of the gaps. So there's been this continual southward movement of sightings for probably 20 years now. All the way down to Withensea, which is that dot right at the bottom. But then if you put in a heat map, which this factors in sightings and the number of animals, all of a sudden you find out that they're absolutely concentrated between Seaton, Sluice and Sunderland. So in the few years of the 2020s so far, the bulk of sightings are not in a huge area. And we've regularly watched groups of dolphins move backwards and forwards down that stretch of the coast. And often they'll move very, very quickly. They'll get to somewhere like King Edward's Bay or the mouth of the Tyne, find some food, stay there a few hours. Then they'll suddenly be on their way and they'll go incredibly rapidly down to Sunderland, and they'll find food in the mouth of the Wear. And most of the time what they seem to be doing is just travelling, looking for prey. So this is what happened the last 2 years. I have factored in some of the 2023 data here. And what you can see is we had a drop in November, December sightings. November, December, January sightings. So our winter sightings started to fall. I mean, 2023, there are a few reasons for it. The weather in October, November, December was pretty awful. It was difficult for people to get out and observe. The sea was incredibly rough for a lot of that time, but fewer sightings. But then you look at Yorkshire. This is where our winter bottlenose dolphins have gone. The increase in sightings in Yorkshire, sort of December, January, February, is extraordinary. The first bottlenose dolphin sighting for Yorkshire in the winter was December 2021. And all of a sudden, it's a feature of the Yorkshire coast in the winter. It's that still continual movement south down the east coast. We're not quite sure where that movement's going to terminate. I don't think it's going to go much further than it has so far. And then here's the really extraordinary graph. This is bottlenose dolphin relative to all cetacean sightings. So before 2018, roughly 1 in every 3, 1 in every 4 sightings of cetacean in northeast England was a bottlenose dolphin. Since 2018, 8 out of every 10 sightings is a bottlenose dolphin. Now, I could have kicked myself because I was wondering what happened. What happened in 2018 that we suddenly went from, there's maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 sightings a year overall. What happened in 2018 where we suddenly ramped up to hundreds and hundreds of sightings every year? And the reason I could kick myself is because that's when we started the North East Cetacean Project Facebook group and gave people a really, really easy way to submit their sightings. It's always an issue with citizen science that getting people to actually give you their sightings, it can be like pulling teeth. But if you give them a really nice, easy Facebook group to do that in, you suddenly generate an awful lot more data than you would expect. And I think part of that increase in the overall sightings is the fact that we created a very easily usable platform for people. And at some point, which will probably be in about a month's time when we've finished all of our current data analysis, I'm going to talk to Paul Stevens at Eric North East, and I'm going to ask him if he would like a few thousand cetacean records for the Eric North East database. I'm a board member of Eric North East, and I've spent a long time wondering exactly how are we going to feed all of that data in. But now I've got a couple of volunteers that are absolutely obsessed with extracting data and putting it into spreadsheets, so they can do that for me, I think. But is this a good thing? It's not necessarily a good thing for other cetaceans. Bottlenose dolphins are big, aggressive, and we've certainly noticed in the last few years, white-beaked dolphins are still offshore in the same numbers that they were previously, but we're now rarely seeing them in nearshore waters. And we've had a couple of incidents where white-beaked dolphins have been very close to shore when we would expect. Bottlenose dolphins have then been reported coming down the coast, and the whitebeaks vanish. And the bottlenose go past, keep going down to Sunderland or Hartlepool or Scarborough. And once they're well clear, the whitebeaks come back to the nearshore waters. So we know that whitebeaks like being in that sort of shallow, warm water for a very short period of each year. And it appears that bottlenose are very much excluding them from that now. So bottlenose being present all year round makes it far less likely to record white-beaked dolphins in nearshore waters. And the reason that may be a problem is we have a lot of data that suggests our nearshore waters are an important calving and nursery area for white-beaked dolphin. So having bottlenose dolphins swimming up and down and the whitebeaks refusing to come in there is not good for that species. But if you think white-beaked dolphins have it bad, you really have to feel sorry for harbour porpoises. We now have, I think, 5 separate incidents that have either been photographed or filmed of bottlenose dolphin killing harbour porpoise in the North East. This was just in the mouth of the Tyne in 2021. And the dolphins had got a hold of a porpoise and were just battering the poor little thing up in the air. I think that was the week where there were 3 separate porpoise kills. 2 in the mouth of the Tyne, 1 in the Weir. Porpoise is a little. A big harbour porpoise would be just about my height, and I'm only 5'8.5" and a bit. And the half and the bit are really, really important when you're only 5'8". So they're not a big animal, you know. And bottlenose dolphins, for reasons that we don't understand, constantly attack and kill harbour porpoise. It's been suggested that they're removing a rival for food, but they don't really eat the same things as each other. So prey doesn't seem to be a driver of this behaviour. It's been suggested that bottlenose dolphins see harbour porpoise as a dolphin calf. It's known that adult male bottlenose dolphins kill calves that are not their own. So they're removing a genetic line that's nothing to do with them. But equally, bottlenose dolphins are incredibly intelligent animals. They're not going to mistake a harbour porpoise for a bottlenose dolphin. And we think, sadly, they do it just because they can. They're aggressive. They spend a lot of their lives fighting, and they're practicing on harbour porpoises. It's not great, and our number of harbour porpoise sightings is falling, unsurprisingly, now that we've got bottlenose dolphins around. And then the other question is, once we know where these things are, how do we know how many there are? And one of the ways of doing this, you can count individual animals and then do all sorts of analysis of that data. But if we can identify individual animals by photographing them, we can then know if it's the same animals that we're seeing over and over again. And this is a page from our original white-beaked dolphin catalogue. And this animal has one of the most extraordinary fins I've ever seen. It's got 2 big chunks out of it. It's got a big white dot in the middle. So that's NLWBD013 spot, because we don't have a lot of imagination when it comes to naming dolphins. Over the last few years, and certainly with bottlenose dolphin, we've got an opportunity that we've never had before, and researchers elsewhere don't really have. Bottlenose are coming incredibly close to the shore in some places in the northeast. So certainly Tynemouth Pier, Roker Pier, South Shields Pier. I'm not sure any of them are open again yet. But we have bottlenose within a few metres of the pier ends. We can photograph them, and if it's an animal that's been photographed before and has some distinctive damage to the dorsal fin, we know that it's been seen before. Also, any photographers in the audience will know about the sort of quality of long telephoto zoom lenses that there are now. So I think Sony have a 200, 600, Nikon have a 180 to 600, Canon have a 100, 500. And digital photography has really revolutionized photo identification. I would not have liked to have tried doing this in the old days of film. You know, you only had 36 shots. I can now point my camera at a dolphin going past and shoot 200 or 300 shots of the same dolphin. and all I have to do is clear my memory card afterwards. So we've now got all sorts of opportunities that we've never had before. And there are lots of different photo ID projects around the world. So up here you've got, this is the University of Aberdeen Bottlenose Dolphin catalogue. Interestingly, nearly all of the dolphins we've photographed here are in that catalogue. We know that this is a single population on the East Coast. I think we've identified just over 70 animals that are already catalogued by Aberdeen University. And then we've got maybe 10 that we can't find in their catalogue, but they may be their animals that have got additional damage. Down at the bottom here, you've got Happy Whale, and they have catalogues of humpbacks. So if you ever photograph a humpback whale anywhere, and you get a photograph of the underside of the tail, send it into the Happy Whale website, and if it's already been catalogued, they'll tell you which animal it is. They'll tell you exactly where it's been seen, when it was first seen, and anything that they know about the life history, you can find out. And then the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust, they've got several catalogues. So they've got minke whale, bottlenose dolphin, and the West Coast community of killer whale, which sadly now is probably only 2 animals. The 2 bull killer whales called John Cohen Aquarius, who have actually turned up in Northumberland. They went past Seaton Sluice a couple of years ago. One of my volunteers lives in Seaton Sluice. I got a call saying there are 2 killer whales going past Seaton Sluice, and I phoned her, and she ran in her pyjamas, got there, and missed them by 5 seconds. They just vanished away to the south, where one of my other volunteers was sitting waiting at Suter Lighthouse, and they went past her there. But they're actually a really tragic story in that animals from that population that have washed up dead have some of the highest toxin levels of any marine fauna ever recorded. And that seems to have taken out that population. But we only know about that population and tracking them through using photo identification. So I've got a few here now. The things on the left are pages from the Aberdeen University catalogue, which our colleague Barbara Cheney has kindly allowed us to use. Singers was the first bottlenose dolphin ever catalogued in the Moray Firth. That animal is still alive. And it's an extraordinary one because Singers appears to be moving backwards and forwards between Northumberland and the Moray Firth. We don't think many of the other animals are going as far north as Moray. Singers just wandering up and down the coast and has really quite a battered dorsal fin. And then by knowing which animals are which, we can also identify things like which animals are female and have produced calves. So this is Magic Nick. I actually photographed her off Tynemouth Pier during a Kitty Week survey a couple of years ago. I just happened to look over the wall and there were 2 dolphins with calves swimming past. So I abandoned counting kitty wakes, photographed the dolphins and discovered it was 2 well-known Aberdeen dolphins, each with fairly small calves. 1029 is another one where we now know that this animal is female and has a calf, and that calf is quite distinctive. It has a very odd white mark in the middle of the dorsal fin. So we're now able to track the movements of that calf because when we photograph it, it looks the same each time. It always looks like it's up to something as well. Look at that face. We've also discovered that some of the Aberdeen University animals stay together. So these 3, 1047, 1048, 1050, we almost always find all 3 of those animals together. And they were all catalogued round about the same time. The fact that they have sequential catalogue numbers tells us that. And then this one, this is extraordinary, and this is testament to the patience and diligence of one of my volunteers. That animal on the right, those are my photographs taken in February 2019 off Dunstanburgh. That is the same animal in the Aberdeen University catalogue. And Jo, who's one of our volunteers, she was getting really frustrated that we'd got this incredibly well-marked dolphin, but she couldn't find it in the Aberdeen University catalogue. So she started looking, and she thought, well, 1136 has a nick in exactly that spot there on the fin. And she went through all of the dolphins I'd photographed, and she found that exact same nick. And if you scale the fins so they're exactly the same size, they overlay perfectly on one another. And she sent this to Barbara Cheney at the Aberdeen Uni Lighthouse Field Station and said, I think this is 1136. I mean, that dolphin doesn't really look anything like it did. But the shape of the fin, the size of the fin, and that one single nick that was in the original catalogue image were enough to identify it as that dolphin. And then we have a couple of dolphins that people always, we get extraordinary reports about this dolphin and the next one. So 1150 is usually referred to as floppy fin and floppy fin has an extraordinary combination of spinal deformities, and because of that, no structural integrity in the dorsal fin, so it just leans over to one side. This animal is now, I think it'll be 13 years old. Yeah, I think he was born in 2010, added to the catalogue in 2012, and he's male. We know he's male. We've got photographs of him breaching, and we can see his underside. And he's a big, vigorous, active animal, especially considering the spinal deformity that he has. The dolphin that we often find with him, the one on the left here, 1102, Mark, again, has a very, very bad spinal issue. And Mark breaches occasionally. Mark is also misgendered. Mark breached upside down, and we know that Mark is a girl. But she's a very quiet little girl who just, most of the time, she's with a little group of dolphins, including 1150, usually around the mouth of the weir at Roker. And she'll just potter around with them, and then if everything else starts breaching, she usually just takes herself off to one side and potters around quietly on her own until it's time for the whole group to move somewhere else. And then they wait for her, and they all swim off together. I've got a little video clip, which hopefully will play. I was actually laid on the boat. We have a little gate in the side of the boat that we let people on through. We opened that, kept all of the passengers away from it, and I was laid with my arms down nearly in the sea with a camera that I'd owned for less than a week. It was, we wouldn't let the passengers on the boat do that. But on that nice flat sea with bow riding dolphins, it was an opportunity that was too good to miss. So I've just got a few more slides. So we have lots of marine protected areas off the northeast coast, and this map was prepared by our colleagues in what was the Berwickshire and Northumberland Marine Nature Partnership. I think that's the name it still has, although now maybe just the Northumberland Marine Nature Partnership. And the important ones for cetaceans, this one is south of our area. This is the Southern North Sea Special Area of Conservation. That's designed to protect harbour porpoise. It's the most ridiculously big marine protected area anywhere near the UK. And harbour porpoise populations move. They often, if you do a survey 1 year and then repeat it 5 years later, the density and concentration of harbour porpoise will have shifted completely. So when they designated this, I think the data was 11 years old at that point. So we have absolutely no idea that that's where the porpoises still are. And then away up in the Moray Firth, you have the Moray Firth Special Area of Conservation, which was designated for these bottlenose dolphins that are now down here. And this Special Area of Conservation, within Scotland, certainly, it moves. If the dolphins of that population move, the SAC boundary shifts. But as far as I'm aware, it only shifts as far as the border. So the dolphins just north of the border are in a special area of conservation, and if there's any threat identified, then legislation can be brought in to deal with that. South of the border, that doesn't exist yet. But then just last week, the Moray Firth to Humber Estuary Important Marine Mammal Area was announced. And these come from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Important Marine Mammal Area Task Force. I think that's their committee name. And they basically look at data, they identify places that are important for marine mammals, so that when governments are looking at introducing protection, this data exists and this area has been identified as important already. That's basically for harbour porpoise, bottlenose dolphin and grey seal, because there are important populations of all three of them in there. And this is one last chart, which is an example of just how much data you can get if you've got a citizen science project with 12,500 people in a Facebook group. Those are the days in 2022 and 2023 with sightings reports of some sort of cetacean. So again, May, June, July, August, September, pretty much daily reports, not necessarily bottlenose dolphin. Even February 2023, reports every single day. And then I thought I'd put this in because I started teaching some of my surveyors to monitor kittiwakes. That's what I've been doing as a day job for the last 3 years. So I thought, there are some kittiwake colonies near some really, really good cetacean watch points. I know, I'll get my volunteers enthused about kittiwake. So I've had cetacean volunteers sending me kittiwake reports as well. And we now have the 2 towers down at Salt Meadows. So the original Salt Meadows tower on the top left, which must be 23, 24 years old now. And then the new tower, which is very, very close to it, which has been in place for just over a year. And I'm always keen on not concentrating on just one species and seeing everything as being interconnected. And kittiwakes will be feeding in the same places that a lot of our cetaceans are. So mapping one or the other will give you a good idea of where the other one is found. And then one last dolphin to look at. The Aberdeen University Field Station ID 116 Runny paint was almost certainly in the group of dolphins that passed sea houses in October 2012. We've got no photographs of her, but we've got a couple of really good written descriptions from somebody who said, there's a dolphin, what appears to be a lightning strike painted on it. That's her. It's natural pigmentation. It's a condition called piebaldism. And runny paint is an old animal now. So she was first photographed in 1989 in the Moray Firth, and she was already an adult, so at least 7 years old. So she's now, and I have to keep working this out, this is my age. Mental arithmetic's getting the best of me now. So she'll be what now, 37, 42 years old or thereabouts. They live for between 40 and 50 years. My greatest wish is that when runny paint passes, she does it out at sea and just sinks. Because I don't want her washing up on a beach in the North East. There's a huge amount of love for this dolphin in North East England. And we know that despite being in her 40s, she's only ever had one calf, which is Paint Splotch, who's on the right there. And Paint Splotch now has a calf. So we know Runny Paint is a grandma. We don't know why she's only produced one viable calf in 40 years. Bottlenose dolphins don't have a menopause. They continue producing calves right to end of life. And Runny Paint, for whatever reason, doesn't. But she is quite an extraordinary animal to look at. All of these reports came from our citizen science project. So just people going down and watching the sea are generating the data that allows us to do this. And the things that we're planning for the future, the North East England Bottlenose Dolphin Catalogue should be completed at some point this month. In fact, it has to be completed at some point this month because we've got a project deadline of the middle of March. We've got reports on relative abundance and distribution that we're about to publish. But we're also looking at life histories of individual dolphins based on photo identification. And also, we will campaign for the designation of a special area of conservation in North East England. We need it. It's an Annex 2 species. Governments have a requirement to designate SACs. And what better argument than the fact that we've got a population of nearly 100 bottlenose dolphins down here. And finally, a big long list of thank yous. The most important one being right down at the bottom was thank you all for listening. You can read the rest of that list if you want. There's an awful lot of it, though, because lots and lots of people contribute to what we're doing. The really important ones there, Joe Richardson is our bottlenose dolphin photo analyzer. Katie Hackett is doing all of our data analysis. Trevor Madison took that sequence of photographs of the porpoise attack. And I have to say a big thank you to Sarah Barrett, who's sitting just there. Sarah is my better half, and without Sarah's support, I don't think I'd be doing anything that I'm doing now. In fact, I would probably still be planning to teach double chemistry to 10Z. I left my teaching career a long time ago. I've never regretted a single day of it. Thank you all for listening.